Good afternoon. I'm Ken Stagg, Director of the Outcomes Center and of the K&T training programs within our CCTS, and welcome to the CCTS Forum focusing on research in the era of COVID. Next slide. So what are our purposes and goals today? I think we've all been getting a rapid number of communications via email, and it's frankly been a little challenging to keep up with all the rapid changes. So this is really an opportunity for us to hear from our UAB leadership on how we can continue to best and most safely continue to conduct clinical and translational research at UAB. As we talk about the policies and new procedures at UAB, we'll also have a chance to discuss other things that are going on regionally and nationally, and refer to some of the key federal policies that are influencing some of our activities here at UAB. Now, we set this up in a very deliberate way to have the didactic part of this be relatively short. We've got a series of presentations, but we really want to hear from all of you. We've exceeded our Zoom capacity of 300. I apologize to those who were not able to join us on this. We're delighted that there was so much interest in this topic. I guess not surprising, but we're going to have a discussion period. We've received quite a few questions already via email. We'll start with those. And then at the end, we'll actually open it up in the last 30 minutes for you to chat any questions in. Next slide, please. So I should start off by maybe saying what this is not. And I think this is certainly not the end of this discussion. We're going to have a number of series both through CCTS as well as a coming town hall this Tuesday led by the Dean of the School of Medicine and other topics that will be ensuing to inform all of us about how we can conduct our work in this very unprecedented time. I think it's important to start off and say what I think everybody probably realizes, and that is that I think a lot of people are frustrated. Some are even angry, and understandably, many are fearful. They're fearful for their own health, that of their family, their friends, the considerable uncertainty about what the future is. That all said, the situation we're in is not of our choosing, and really what we can do now, what we have control over, is how we respond to this and how we work together as a UAB research community to do our best. So I think we all should obviously keep all this in mind as we engage in this discussion over the next hour with our institutional leadership, as we think about new ways to conduct our research. And while we do that, most importantly, maximizing everybody's health and safety. Next slide. So these are the speakers. We have a series of talks. We'll go through those in just a minute, but let me first also introduce a number of people who will join our panel. In the next slide, please. And a number of other institutional leaders, Anupa Magarwal, Tika Benveniste, Chris Brown, Melinda Cotton, and Emily Levitan will be joining us for the discussion period. Next slide. So we'll have short presentations, and I want to emphasize that to our speakers. We do want to keep you to your 5 minutes. Following the presentations, we'll first have the panel react to a number of questions that we've already received via email. And then following that, using the chat feature of Zoom, you'll have a chance to ask additional questions. Now, we'd like you to stay muted. With 300 participants, it's not possible to do this with oral questions, but Jeff Foster and I will moderate the questions. And I want to particularly thank Jeff Foster and Brian Wallace for their expert help in organizing this. So let's go ahead and get started. I guess before then, next slide, please, Brian. For those who have not used a lot of Zoom, which I suspect is now becoming the minority, if you go down to the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a box which says chat. That's where you can enter a question, and you should direct that question to everyone in the audience. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to turn it over to Bob Kimberly. And Bob is director of the CCTS, and he'll lead us off talking about some general issues around COVID-19 and research.
Ken, thanks very much. I do appreciate the introduction that you've given, and I certainly appreciate everything you've done along with Jeff and Brian, and frankly, everybody who's joined today with capping out at our 300 limit on this. It's clear that there's a lot of interest, and we hope that everyone will find today useful. I have only 3 slides, and really the purpose of the 3 slides is to punctuate a couple of key points and really to set up the people who will follow me in terms of brief but somewhat more formal presentations. So let me just jump in and talk about the way the work paradigm is changing. We all know that we're now operating under a limited business model. And what this means is wherever possible, we're enjoined to work remotely from home. You probably would recognize that what's behind me is not my typical laboratory or office. Right now, Action Central for me is the kitchen table in my house. Of course, within a limited business model, essential activities continue. I do understand there is some discussion about what the definition of essential is, but let me hit a couple of high points, and then perhaps we can refine them in some of the subsequent presentations. When one is working in a laboratory setting, the idea is to complete essential research experiments that are currently underway, but not to initiate any new experiments, and any work that is being done is done with a limited staffing model, mindful of the public health precautions, which involve not only washing of hands, but social distancing. In the clinical study setting, it's very similar. When there are clinically essential visits, those can continue with the appropriate precautions that have been outlined in the various guidance documents that have come through the university. New enrollment is on hold. Now, there is some discussion about that. We're not talking about clinical studies of COVID-19, obviously, but the idea is we really should be ramping down our clinical trials activities. And of course, remote monitor visits can happen if they're remote. Site initiation visits can happen if they are remote. In fact, yesterday, I think, was a site initiation visit for remdesivir, and there are no on-site visits. Can I have the next slide, Brian? So in addition to changing the work paradigm, we're changing the educational paradigm. Again, with the limited business model, we're asked to figure out ways to learn together, and to explore remotely from home. That's not so hard to do now that we have so much digital connection, whether it was libraries or databases or whatever it may be. We have continued with online meetings and activities. And actually, from a CCTS perspective, in many ways, we were preparing at least the paradigms for doing this quite some time ago, because the vast majority of our educational activities we stream across the partner network. And I do hope that some of our partners have been able to join before we capped out at 300. Among those online activities or forums, our CTSTP course, group meetings like Friday Fellows, all happening remotely. We have learning activities for study teams that are now remote, with examples being the Research Training Program, or RTP. And in the laboratory and clinical setting, the idea is team meetings, and team meetings. And we'll hear more about that in just a minute. And in the final slide, Brian, I'd like to just make us aware of a couple of initiatives. It's become very apparent that there's a great deal of interest in biorepository activities, and we are working together with Paul Gepfert in the Infectious Disease Division to pull together a uniform consenting and biorepository initiative. Similarly, in terms of clinical data, some of which may lead to linking with biorepository specimens, but others may lead to registries. We're pulling together a uniform consent for the use of institutional clinical data with Matt White and Jim Semino as the lead. And then finally, interestingly, there are a number of different proposals for clinical trials. The clinical lead for that is Jeannie Marazzo, who's head of ID. We should all be aware that we have the remdesivir trial that I believe started today, if not last night. There's interest in a hydroxychloroquine trial, and there was just approved, I don't think we're yet a site, an Actemra, which is an anti-IL-6 trial. Anyway, Cindy Joyner, Jennifer Croker, and I are going to be the focal points for those ideas so we can help Jeannie be more effective in the use of her time, and we can follow up later on in discussion about some of the ideas that have come through. But with those comments, Ken, what I'd like to do is turn the forum over to Adam McClintock and the IRB.
Right, thank you, Bob, and welcome, Adam. If you have questions, please use the chat at the very bottom of the screen to put those in, and we'll start to collate those right now. Adam?
Thank you, Dr. Fagg, Dr. Kimberly. Next slide, please, Brian. I'm going to give a very brief introduction, and then I'll talk a little bit about how to handle ongoing study procedures and participant interactions, along with how to make changes to accommodate the current environment. And then I'll end by talking about new projects related to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So to start out, the Office of the IRB is fully operational. We're conducting our pre-reviews, our review determinations, having weekly convened IRB meetings via Zoom. We had a very successful second IRB meeting through Zoom yesterday. Our expedited reviewers are continuing to review and approve submissions and protocols daily through their remote access. And I know this is a challenging time for everyone in the research community and the general community, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give a special thanks to the IRB staff. You know, they received the call on a Sunday afternoon, evening, and quickly pivoted to transition to remote work, and you know, got going without even really missing a beat. So thanks to the IRB team. Now, you can find updates and answers to questions right now related to the IRB on the Office of Research website. The business continuity website includes FAQs for the IRBs as well as some of the other units, IACUC, the Research Safety Committees, CIRB, OSP, others perhaps. And if you don't find what you need there, feel free to reach out to the IRB email inbox and copy me. We'll make sure to get your questions answered. Next slide, please. So ongoing studies, we've adopted sort of a two-tiered framework similar to that which some other institutions have adopted. The framework categorizes study visits as essential versus non-essential. And really, if possible, to echo Dr. Kimberly, if a study visit can be done remotely, it should be done remotely. So the tiered framework is primarily based on factors such as whether or not the in-person visit is necessary for the health and well-being of the participant, and if so, if the benefits of the visit outweigh the potential risks of contracting COVID-19. Again, any visits that can be done remotely should be done remotely. If a visit must be done in person, you should exercise social distancing, and you know, minimize direct patient contact, develop procedures to prevent transmission of the disease from study personnel to research participants, and vice versa. Next slide, please. So let's touch on what to do for ongoing studies. Changes to research procedures still must be approved by the IRB in advance of implementation, unless those changes are being made to prevent immediate and imminent harm to participants. If you have a change that needs to be made in order to prevent risk to participants or study personnel, just do them. You can report them later, and we'll get it cleaned up after the fact. So those ongoing studies that do need to transition to remote visits, but not in a way that eliminates harm to participants or study personnel, go ahead and submit an amendment and contact me directly. We're prioritizing those amendments and already have approved in the last week and a half 3 or 4 dozen amendments related to COVID-19. And usually we get to those within 24 hours, and that's 7 days a week. So if you submit something on a weekend, you're not going to have to wait till a Monday afternoon or evening to get something. You'll probably get something within the next 24 hours. Any deviations or non-compliance resulting from these types of changes still should be tracked and reported to the IRB according to our usual policy. That's generally a 3 or 5 day reporting window or a continuing review, really depending on the degree of risk associated with the event or deviation. Next slide, please. So new studies, we're obviously prioritizing treatment-related studies and health surveillance projects that are related to COVID-19. That notwithstanding, we also recognize that this is a really unique opportunity, and we also have the responsibility to study other aspects of the crisis that don't directly involve treatment. So we're also prioritizing those projects. Other new projects not related to COVID-19 are not explicitly prohibited, but they'll be prioritized accordingly. Like any other ongoing study, the new protocols should consider the current environment and how the study procedures may be impacted by the limitations. Again, all study visits that can be done remotely really need to be done remotely, particularly for those in new projects. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Sag and Jeff.
Adam, thank you very much. Next up, and quite nice and follow-up to your presentation, Adam, is Dr. Cynthia Joyner, who is our Associate Vice Chair for Research in the Department of Medicine.
Hi, thanks, Ken. Wanted to give kind of an update on clinical research and where we are, and just making it known to people that, you know, this information is what we have current. So even by the time we finish this presentation, it could change, and it probably will change over the upcoming days and weeks. So next slide, please. One of the things with research in general, so not just clinical research, but making sure you have a contingency plan in place for your research and your research team. Right now, communication with the sponsor, investigator, and research team is critical. Things are changing rapidly, and you need to have a really good communication plan in place. Guidance on how to draft a contingency plan and put one in place is on the website here. I highly recommend, it doesn't matter what type of research you're doing, but you have a plan in place. So for clinical research, just consider your response and how you're going to manage things such as enrollment, you know, study visits, what is essential and non-essential. Oops, can you go back one? How investigational product is going to be dispensed or managed, and then oversight and review of study results. I know for some of our studies, we still have lab results that are faxed. And so if we're on limited operations, how are you going to handle that? Who's going to go in and get those, or how you're going to review them? Protection of the participants and the research team members. So having that front and center is important. And then based on all the changes that we're facing, what are the long-term goals for new studies? How is recruitment going to be handled? And looking at financial stability as well. Next slide, please. Just thinking of the study management, we've talked some about study enrollment. So I have on here that we highly encourage suspending enrollment. And really, we don't want enrollment to occur unless it's absolutely necessary. So is the participation in the study essential to a participant's health or well-being? And can the study data be collected and the enrollment be done and managed remotely? So I say highly encourage suspending, because we do know that we're going to have COVID-19 studies and we don't want to suspend those or not enroll to those, but being very thoughtful about what is important right now and what to enroll to. With sponsor visits, Bob touched on this, but deferring all in-person monitor visits and site initiation visits, and then consider remote monitoring. We have UAB Box, which you can use for some study files, just being aware you can't share patient data. I think this is a real opportunity for us to think about how we can do more remotely and using the technology that's available to us. We also know that some sponsors are very open to this. So taking the time that we have now to think about how to do this different and continue that forward. Next slide. Spending a little bit of time on participant study visits, this seems to be where I get a lot of questions, but we want to conduct visits remotely or defer them when possible. If you have to conduct an essential visit, so that's a visit that is vital to the health of a participant, and that needs to be done in person, then there are some steps that you need to take. I highly lean on what's going on in the clinical realm, so what ambulatory or hospital has set as guidance for clinical care. So if you are bringing a person in or a participant in for a study, maybe they have to have a procedure, or they have to have safety labs done, or they need product dispensed or something like that, you should be calling that participant 24 hours in advance and screening them for COVID-19 symptoms. And so the last slide I have is the current screening from the clinical side of what you should be asking. Oops, sorry, go back, please. You want to screen that participant on the phone 24 hours in advance, and then when they come into the patient care area, you want to do another screen. You really should only be conducting these visits in a patient care area. So JT15 is a very good resource that's available. I say that because we know that we have some research areas that are not in patient care areas. You might be seeing your research patients in Lyons Harrison or someplace like that. UAB did enact a no visitors or guest policy, and so that extends to clinical research patients as well. If they have a caregiver, they are allowed to come with them, but we really want to limit the people that are coming on campus and on site and into our clinical areas. If you're going to be screening participants and you're going to be talking to them, it's also really important to know the steps and how to report a patient with COVID-19 symptoms. That's on the slide I have at the end as well, but you need to speak with your investigator immediately and then follow the clinical steps for notifying the proper people. We also have a lot of questions. So in clinical research, usually the coordinator and the investigator are going to get some questions since they work so closely with participants. There are a lot of great resources for COVID-19, and the link is here. But knowing how to get to those and how to share those resources with participants is important. Next slide. I can't say enough about staying current. Things change daily, even a couple times during a day. You definitely want to be able to stay in touch with your research team. It's the time to look at new project management software. You can use Trello, Microsoft Teams. I think we're all learning about Zoom, but you need to facilitate communication as best as possible and track progress with your research teams. Definitely need to stay up to date with UAB medicine guidelines and the communications regarding hospital and ambulatory processes. We know that we have studies that go on in the hospital and in the ambulatory setting. FDA guidance is emerging. They came out with new information and a new guidance policy you should be aware of if you're doing clinical trials, and then also following the NIH guidance. Next. So this is just a symptom check. This is the most recent one that's being used in ambulatory care with instructions as what to do if you have a participant that has symptoms of COVID-19 and what to do with those. That's it.
Cindy, thank you very much. That was great. And we'll turn now to Dr. Paul Muttner, who is Associate Dean of Research in the UAB School of Public Health, to give a School of Public Health perspective, particularly around observational research in this new era. Paul?
Thank you, Ken, and thanks everyone for joining. So I'm going to be covering a few topics. I'm going to talk about what we're doing at the School of Public Health to facilitate research progress and continuity. I'll talk about communications, and then I'll close by talking about new COVID-19 related research initiatives. Next slide, please. So for research progress and continuity, we are working as much as feasible to continue regularly scheduled activities, obviously doing them virtually. Some projects are being put on hold, of course, as has been mentioned. However, if data collection and interventions are stopped, we're working with faculty and students to see how research can continue, whether that's through data analysis and papers, ancillary study grant proposals, new or revised grants, online trainings, as well as for students' thesis and dissertation progress. And I'm happy during the Q&A to talk about different activities we're doing for this. An important issue that we had been working on prior to this is a continuity of operations plan, and of particular relevance to investigators at the School of Public Health include our plans for computer access. While most people do have computers at home, some people did not. And then there are also inevitably going to be computer problems, some of which can be fixed by IT, but at times replacement computers may be necessary. And so we've been refining our plans for computer access for faculty and staff. And obviously this is going to be something that evolves as the remote work continues. But so far, I think we've done a good job in ensuring that people have access to computers and that they can get their work done. A major initiative at the School of Public Health has been to enable the Survey Research Unit to function remotely. And the Survey Research Unit is a great resource for conducting interviews that aren't face-to-face, that can't be conducted now. The Survey Research Unit is really a gem for the School of Public Health. They work on the BRFSS survey, the Regard survey, and I'll come back to later, the Survey Research Unit, I think, can be key in terms of collecting public health data at this time. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, there's been the School of Public Health Continuity of Operations Committee and then the Emergency Management Team that have been meeting essentially 4 times a week just to make sure any issues that arise are being addressed. Next slide. Everyone here probably knows communications in a time like this is especially important. And from a research perspective, I do provide a daily update with happenings in research that may be of interest to investigators at the school. We have, as I mentioned previously, we have 3 times weekly emergency management team phone calls. We are working regularly. This is the chairs as well as myself as associate dean and Paul Irwin as the dean to have regular check-in with faculty, especially assistant professors. Included in this has been, we've been having virtual lunches. We've had 2 virtual lunches over the past 2 weeks. And these are activities that had been taking place in person prior to the remote work being implemented, but we're continuing with those and having conversations about working remotely as well as research productivity. Next slide. So from reaching out to national and international colleagues, just wanted to touch on this. ASPPH, or the Association of Programs and Public Health, of Schools and Program of Public Health, they have an Associate Deans for Research message board, which obviously has been active. And you can see we talk about planning for COVID-19 research, managing research given current restrictions, and discussion of future research and administrative supplements. And since I sent these slides in, I think it was a couple days ago, we have a phone call with the Associate Dean scheduled with Mike Lauer from NIH, the head of extramural research, and that's scheduled for tomorrow. So hopefully I'll learn something more that I can pass on after that call regarding NIH and how they're going to move forward with research and supplements, etc. And then I've had some contact, albeit somewhat limited, with NIH project officers. NHLBI has a COVID task force, and still learning more about some of their activities. Next slide. At the School of Public Health, we've been working to engage in new research activities related to COVID. This has been quite active in terms of many meetings over the past 2 weeks, really focusing on trying to identify public health research needs. We've developed a question bank from ideas from faculty. We're working to provide assistance on IRB submissions. We're forming grant writing groups and paper writing groups surrounding this research. And to facilitate the research groups, we've really grouped the thematic areas using this social ecological model of prevention from the CDC, where there are 5 levels from societal, community, relationship, individual, and genetics and genomics. And these are areas you can see the faculty who have been helping coordinate these groups, and they're working to develop research activities. And with that, I'll stop, and happy to answer questions during the chat session.
Paul, thank you. That was very clear, and we already gotten a great response on the questions, so keep those coming. Please review the ones that have been submitted if you can. It'll make it easier to sort out what's new. Our final presentation before going to questions is from 2 of our deans at the grad school, David Schneider and Lisa Schwiebert. So not sure which of you is going to present or start, but take it away.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you to the CCTS for this opportunity. Yes, David Schneider and I are here, and we'll both participate in the discussion section. And we're certainly here on behalf of Lori McMahon, Dean of the Graduate School, who's very committed to making sure our trainees are being thought of and taken care of in this way. Next slide, please. We really wanted to give a broad overview of the communication that we've been having with our trainees, both certainly graduate students in GBS as well as grad students and postdocs across campus. As you know, these are trainees who are particularly stressed and anxious at this time, certainly for their productivity, ongoing courses, and the like, as well as trying to take care of, in some cases, small children, elderly parents, and such. And so they're very much caught in the middle. There's been a lot of information that's already been discussed coming at trainees in particular. We've been trying to channel this fire hose of information into a large series of FAQs that are housed now both on the graduate school website as well as the postdoc website. And certainly these are communications that have been going out to not only trainees, but to mentors alike, to make sure that they are in the loop as well. Also been working with Angela Stowe in student counseling to assemble and to keep updated a series of mental health resources for our students that they have immediate access to, and making sure that, their needs are being met. Next slide, please. Importantly, we wanted to highlight communication that has been transmitted again to both trainees and mentors about guidance for mentored research. And I'm hoping that most, if not all of you, have received this communication, which was crafted amongst ourselves, the graduate school, together with the VPR's office and leadership in the School of Medicine as well. Several points that we really wanted to highlight and reiterate, particularly for today's discussion, is that mentors articulate and communicate a plan for their trainees to certainly be understanding of flexibility and schedules. Again, I mentioned the small children type of coordination that has to be done to really be understanding and to make sure that trainees are communicated with, to reinforce that no new experiments or projects certainly should be started at this time, and that there are many things that trainees can do at home, whether it's reading literature, analyzing data, certainly starting those reviews or perhaps the dissertation write-ups, but most importantly to stay connected, whether it's by Zoom, to have lab meetings in that manner, and such. Next slide, please. This has been a bit of a moving target with regard to new hires, in particular for postdocs. As of today, as you know, there's a hiring freeze until further notice. Those offers that have already been put on paper and directly administered to a particular trainee and signed on the dotted line, those can go forward with the exception and understanding that if there is an international trainee involved under a J1, that those are going to be delayed at the federal level until June 1st at the least. Again, this is information that is updated almost daily, if not more so. So definitely we'll keep everyone in the loop communication-wise. And importantly, to reiterate to those trainees who are funded by some type of training award through the NIH, whether it's a T32 or F award, for example, that those stipends will continue. I heard that reinforced on a AAMC call today, and there's direct guidance as highlighted in the link on this slide. Next slide, please. Again, we're here for discussion, and there's our contact info along with our websites, again, where those FAQs are housed. And we look forward to your questions and further discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So we've gotten a lot of questions in. We had some that we had received already. If we could unmute the rest of our panel, we'll go ahead and turn to the question session. We have questions that have really come in that have to do with grants administration, with research participants and clinical trials, as well as training. So I'm just going to start off, and then Jeff Foster and I will alternate questions that we received live and as well as ones that we've gotten before. So the first question I'll direct to Chris Brown or Melinda as they see fit. But there is a question about how will NIH and other sponsors address delays in research progress due to the COVID epidemic? Will they be issuing no-cost extensions and/or cost extensions? How will that transpire?
Let me start off and just say a little bit. I think Melinda's more informed with the details. NIH and all the other federal agencies are completely aware of the situation, and so they are trying to be as flexible as they can. They're dealing with this as well. They're having to work remotely. So I believe that the spirit is that they're trying to be amenable to ideas and changes that need to be made. I know Melinda's looked into this a little bit deeper, so perhaps she could embellish on what I've just said.
Sure. So to respond to that question, what we would like to do is, it sounds like that they will be approving no-cost extensions through December 31st. That is your first no-cost extension. If there's an active grant that expires anytime between now and December 31st, OSP can do the automatic one-year no-cost extension. And beyond that, we would continue to be able to do those. That's no problem. Normally, there's only 3 reasons why you can get a no-cost extension. Because of COVID-19, they are we won't have to ask for any of those three. It can be because of COVID-19, but we still need to submit that through the ERA Commons system. So we would ask departments and PIs to follow more the normal process with those OSPs.
And Lisa, I think you had you just posted a response as well for T32s. Do you want to make that comment?
I do. Thanks. Thank you, Ken. As far as I understand, those T32 monies and will keep flowing. But as always, I always encourage anyone to connect with their program official to confirm and reinforce that. Every institute is different. Every mechanism is different. But again, from my general understanding, that is to continue.
Great. Jeff, do you have one?
Yeah, I'm going to try and, I have one question, and then I think this follows a series of questions, and I'm going to direct it to Melinda and Chris and or anyone from OSP. The question is, our group has had several payment requests for participant visits that were completed or before during the limited business operations being returned as do not meet the definition of critical, meaning emergency need. That these requests will be processed when UAB returns to normal business operations. Given that many folks are being temporarily or permanently furloughed from their jobs, as we have previously committed to compensating them for their time, can this policy be waived or clarified so that we can compensate our patient research partners? Following up on that, based on the chat, we have several questions about compensating participants for remote study visits, which I think would fall in the same sort of category. I didn't know if a panelist could answer that question.
So I checked in with Stephanie about paying participants. And so the normal, the Greenfire process, which has been in place, would be the mechanism. And she said if there are new patients that have not been set up for Greenfire payments, then they would have to work through a process, but they're happy to do that as quickly as they can. So.
Okay, and Melinda, is that Stephanie Mullins? Who is that? Yes. Yeah. So for folks on the, yep, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead.
Chris Brown here. This is not quite an answer to that, but it's something I want to share with the group. The NIH in particular, but other federal agencies and even FEMA agencies like that, there may be the opportunity for reimbursement of costs as incurred as a part of the COVID shutdown that universities have to go through. So if you've had to, if every lab could in some way keep track of what those expenses are. For example, you have to keep buying cryogens to keep your machines from, well, I don't want to say freezing up, from not freezing up, or you've got to continue to pay the service contract, but you can't do the research, or you've contributed 10 cases of masks or gloves for the hospital. Keep track of all that. There may be, keywords, may be an opportunity for reimbursement. I'm going to share that information with Stephanie Mullins so that we can get it out to all the financial officers so people can do that.
Great, thank you, Chris. Let me direct this to Bob and possibly Paul. I guess maybe Anupam actually, and it has to do with doing COVID studies within the institution. Is there a document outlining best practices, and are there guidelines for personnel and access to personal protective equipment?
So Ken, what I would like to do is start first perhaps with the remdesivir trial, because that's just gone active, and obviously this is dealing with persons who are COVID-19 positive and who are very ill. And it's a multi-site NIH trial, and they are developing now all the procedures for contact with those patients, both with the caregivers and the study personnel. One of the reasons for my comment at the very beginning about a coordinated approach to consenting for biorepository for clinical data and such is to help us all realize we can't just have interested investigators walking on the halls in the hospital trying to either get perhaps information on patients with COVID-19 and perhaps blood specimens. So I think the way to answer that question in terms of protection of personnel, which is really important, is to work with those groups. And how to do that is an active process right now. We're hoping we'll have guidelines posted by tomorrow afternoon, and if not, then by very early next week.
Great. Any other comments on that? Excellent. Jeff, did you have one?
All right. Yes, I do. So this is directed to Adam and any other IRB staff that are on. A couple questions. One is, how broad is the blanket IRB for use of the patient biorepository, specifically related to COVID-19? And then is an IRB amendment needed for conducting visits via phone or video conference?
Yeah, let me just, before answering that, let me just add to that, because there's a number of questions that have come in about doing things remotely and whether we have a framework, any infrastructure for doing remote research, and is that, for example, if you wanted to recruit new patients and you were able to do it remotely, would that fall within the confines of the prohibition on new patient recruitment? So I think these are mostly IRB questions.
Yeah, so the first one, the blanket biorepository consent, that actually hasn't been established yet. So I don't know that we have a good answer for that at this time. But I think Dr. Kimberly just referenced it. We would have some guidance here soon. As far as the remote visits, I saw there were a lot of questions about that in the chat as well. So one of them was, if we can do a remote visit, does the HSP have to be updated? And so if you have follow-up visits that were approved by the IRB and you didn't specify that they were going to be done in a particular location or in person, and you can do those easily remotely, and it's something of the nature of, you know, a follow-up quality of life questionnaire or something of that nature that doesn't otherwise change the study procedures, I think you can probably move forward with those without an explicit change to the HSP. But if it's something that you said they're going to be in the clinic, or it's going to somehow involve changes to the study procedures, so potentially sending people equipment or having them do self-monitoring, then that would be something that would need to be amended. But again, we're getting those amendments turned around within 24 hours in most cases. So that's something that we're being very sensitive to and moving forward with very quickly. As far as new recruitment that can be done entirely over remote visits, I think that there probably is not a prohibition against that if it doesn't require any in-person interaction.
Jeff, could I make an additional comment about the question about biorepository?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I would broaden it to both biorepository and clinical data. I would say that we are working very actively with Adam's group, and they have been absolutely fantastic in helping out as we try to negotiate these waters. In fact, our last call with IRB staff was right before this meeting. So to those who are interested, we're hoping to have the protocol submitted by tomorrow. I think we're working together to minimize the iterative time to refine it. But the concept is, especially for clinical data, including consent to recontact for longitudinal studies, which might address one person's question about 180-day follow-up. That is all being rolled into this consent. For the persons interested in biorepository, probably the details there are better discussed in offline conversation. but I'd be happy to have those discussions.
Excellent, thank you. Any other follow-ups to that? There were some questions about research infrastructure around doing remote health and remote data collection. I don't know if Paul or Emily, you want to mention any unique resources that you're aware of, or if others have experience with that?
Emily, I'm not sure if you would like to say anything.
I mean, so I think that, like you said, they're trying to get the SRU back up and running. I think that other options may be, if you're doing online, to do, you know, red cap surveys and those sorts of things.
Great. I want to go to training, and there was a question that came in yesterday about anecdotal accounts are circulating about some labs running staggered schedules and requiring grad students, undergrads to continue working into work shifts from midnight to 8 a.m. to earn their degrees. What is the guidance on what is being done to ensure UAB policies on lab operations during this time are being followed?
So I'll take a first stab, and then I'll ask David to join in on this. We really lean on departmental leadership to monitor and make sure that people are only coming in to do absolutely essential work. Clearly defining that essential piece is going to be different for every lab situation. But aside from that, that's what we're leaning on. I'll ask David to step in.
Yeah, I agree, Lisa. And the other thing that we did do is, as the graduate school, I think more than a week ago, sent out this commentary about progress towards research and definition of, you know, new experiments versus continuing essential experiments. And that was communicated both to the students and to the mentors. From my point of view, I haven't heard any communications that students are being forced into conditions that they're not comfortable with. But again, I think several people said it, it's really important that communication be fluid between the mentors and their labs. But yeah, I think the leadership has been pretty consistent in saying that no new experiments need to be started.
Right, we have heard rather a few situations where postdocs have left the area to either take care of family or because they were concerned about being pressured to work, but that's only been one or two. So as David said, you know, we are leaning on leadership to monitor and have been communicating directly that guidance.
And Ken, I'd like to add one thing. Again, it's sort of towards the future with a national Zoom meeting I was on with VPRs from around the country. There is a recognition that this will invariably slow down some of our graduate students from attaining their degrees and postdocs from finishing their work. But even when they do, let's face it, the country's going to be dealing with an economic downturn of some kind or another. Jobs are going to be scarce. So what the idea is that we would, as a group of VPRs or others, push the federal government to recognize that and make more opportunities available for postdoctoral work, so the graduate students are not left in the lurch, even if.
Jeff?
Okay, I'm going to open this up to a couple. Ask if there are any members of the partner network that have joined us. I see Leanne Ross is on. I believe I saw Lucio Mile earlier. If they had questions they would like to pose to the panel at this time. Okay, we can come back if there is one, Dr. Mile, Dr. Ross, or Ray. I think I can see you as well. But I do have a question now, and I'm going to direct this to Dr. Kimberly and to Cindy. This had one that came in yesterday about a NIH trial that began before COVID-19. Outcomes will be affected. They had reached roughly 50% of their recruitment goal, and they're curious what their options are going forward and how they should report any changes to study design, the study protocol, and/or analyses to clinicaltrials.gov, and what advice we can provide as far as amending the clinicaltrials.gov registration, if necessary.
Jeff, if I understood, this is an NIH-sponsored trial, and I think the first thing to do is to work with the sponsor, and if it's multi-site, with the other sites, to get closure on what the appropriate adjustments to study design would actually be. That's the most important thing as adjustments are made to optimize patient safety and personnel safety. Once those decisions are made, then yes, I'm sure there would be some adjustments to clinicaltrials.gov. Specifically, what would need to be entered probably would depend on the specific changes in the trial. So I think the general points are to work with the sponsor to make sure there's agreement and closure on the changes. Of course, the IRB is involved in any changes. Communicate those changes to the patients. That was part of the FDA guidance from last week, so everyone is in the loop. And then after all of that, work with clinicaltrials.gov for any adjustments. We do have a couple of people on campus who are familiar with clinicaltrials.gov, and we'd be happy to help out in such a case. And the way to get that help, I'd suggest just contacting CCTS through our website or by phone, through Research Commons.
So,
yeah, and I just want to.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to add from personal experience related to a study that we had. You can edit the clinicaltrials.gov record. It does create an audit trail with justification. And to Dr. Kimberly's point, working with our clinical research team here on campus, they will guide you through that process the entire way.
So there's a question
if that is needed.
There's a question that's come in about essential versus non-essential clinical research and how we determine that. And has UAB considered any sort of a tier approach to which participants we need to see that remain on experimental therapies?
So Ken, whom would you like to start that conversation? Maybe I could start, and Chris or others, maybe Cindy would like to comment. I think it's important to, first of all, just state that essential, in my view, that definition should be anchored in terms of safety and benefit to the patient. It's not anchored in terms of our investigator interest in the trial. We are all very interested in what we do, but really this is a decision matrix that's oriented toward patient safety. Essential, I think, we tried to be clear in the guidance documents that are posted on the BPR website. It's when participant health is an issue. And, you know, trying new therapies outside the space of COVID-19. I mean, we have to do everything in COVID-19, but in other spaces, we wouldn't have to be doing clinical trials if we knew that the intervention was actually effective for health. So we just need to keep that in mind, even though we're all very interested in having our trials go forward. Chris, you may wish to make a comment, and Cindy, I know we've been discussing how best to convey the concept of essential versus non-essential. You guys may wish to comment as well.
Well, since you called on me, I'll comment to say that the way you expressed it was exactly correct when it comes to clinical research, that it's the need of the patient as determined by the healthcare provider, the physician, and is paramount when it comes to that. In terms of non-clinical research, there's a different set of criteria in and around, can this be done in any other way, in a remote way? Is it a long-term ongoing experiment that would be lost if we didn't take care of it? Things such as that. But I think the question was around clinical research.
So Bob and I have had a number of conversations around this, but I see it more as therapeutic studies and maybe non-therapeutic studies. You can have some studies that can be done by phone. I know there are a couple questions in the comments section about if enrollment was started by phone, can it continue by phone? If they're doing focus groups, can they do those by phone? I think those are types of studies that, yes, we could probably continue enrollment in and still be supportive of the research that's going on. I think the real concern is around the therapeutic studies in patients coming in and being either exposed to COVID-19 or possibly bringing COVID-19 in or higher risk. So therapeutic oncology trials, Bob and I talked about, is those patients are probably high risk. It's following the guidance on that VPR website as to what is most beneficial to the patient, but really thinking if it's essential and beneficial. The PI does have a say in that, but the PI also has to be following the guidance that we've given.
Any other comments on that? Okay. So there's a question that came in about what happens if there's a mandatory lockdown? How is that going to temper some of the discussion we've had about clinical research? And I know that there's a lot of what ifs, and as I think, Cindy, you said very clearly in your talk, the things are changing rapidly, and we're just not able to totally cover all the contingencies at this time. But has there been any institutional discussion about how we might operate in that circumstance, particularly around therapeutic studies?
Bob, do you want to maybe start with that?
I'll let you go first and I'll follow this time.
So I think that we don't know the real answer as to what is going to be next. I think this has presented us with is an opportunity to think about how we want to manage clinical research or trials going forward. If we have patients that are still on investigational products, even if we go to a much more limited status, we're still a healthcare institution and we would need to see those patients, is my thought. It's just how best can we do it in a very safe environment?
I know that a few of our sponsors have made adjustments to the way that study drugs are being delivered and have offered an opportunity, assuming that it fits within the IRB requirements, to send study drug directly to patients and do accountability over the phone instead of having them come in for a visit under certain circumstances.
I think that's a really good option. Another option might be if they have to have safety labs, maybe they don't come here for them. Maybe they can go someplace else for those labs, either a local lab or their physician.
So if I could add 2 points to that comment, I would certainly agree if they could go to a local lab, that might be a solution, as long as going to that lab is not potentially exposing the patient to COVID-19. So there are 2 issues. Does the exposure happen in UAB space, which is important for UAB as an institution, but we should be thinking of patient space. And if they're going to another location, does that location represent a risk for them? So I would just add that to any wrinkles and adjustments in protocol. I see several chat questions asking, is it the PI's decision as to what happens? And I would suggest that, of course, the PI is part of the conversation, but these have to be authentic conversations, and they are not only with input from the PI, but also from departmental leadership. And I would also add to that school level leadership. And I think it's important to have that very healthy discussion amongst the different parties to make the best decision we can for the patients that we're serving.
Thank you. Jeff, do you have any others? I think we're getting actually toward the end of the questions that we've received. There's been a number of people that have written in about interesting research ideas and particular projects that they're interested in and looking for collaborations around. So I would encourage you to connect with one another if there's a particular topic of interest that's been raised in the chat.
I think the main question here that we received before this was, given everything that's going on, how are clinical and translational research centers regionally collaborating, especially with frontline facilities to ensure comprehensive COVID-related data collection for future research and hypothesis testing? What are we doing to make sure that research maintains a seat at the table given this difficult time? I'll direct that first to Dr. Kimberly. I think Dr. Benaviste may also be on, as well as Dr. Brown.
So thank you for the question, Jeff. I think there are several different perspectives that we can and should bring to the table. I'd like to take the one in terms of pulling together clinical experience to see if we can extract observations that will help inform improved clinical care, perhaps avoidance of certain standard drugs that might be detrimental in the situation and so forth. Because there's a lot of interest in this space and less data. So there's much more opinion than there is real evidence. From a CTSA consortium, we now have 16 major academic centers across the country. We are one that have agreed to pool all of our clinical data with regard to COVID-19. This is being led through NCATS. The purpose is to pull together, now we're up over, I think, over 200 million covered lives. So the N will be pretty large. And again, the goal here, to the point that you asked about, Jeff, is how can we take the resources that we have, use them in a much more effective way to make observations that will improve both our understanding of COVID-19 biology, risk factors, and therapeutics. I'll yield the floor to other perspectives which will be equally important.
Well, maybe at this time, I'd like to ask those who are unmuted on the panel, you've had a chance as well to look at some of the chat questions, or if you have any additional things that you want to bring up that you think we haven't yet covered that would be important for this group.
So Ken, this is Melinda. I wanted to touch on one of the questions that had come in prior to the forum, and that was with regard to the UAB policy on paying grants and contract staff during the COVID-19 crisis. And so myself and Stephanie are working on a draft policy that will hopefully finish this weekend and provide to the compliance office. Our stance is that we can continue to pay faculty and staff off of grants and contracts. It has to be across the board. It can't just be at the just from federal grants, but regardless of the support they're on. We have not had any contact from other non-federal sponsors saying that they will not pay it, but our policy has to be presented to the federal government as consistent across all sponsors. So we're working on guidelines for that, and one of the things that we talked about today was that we would likely suspend effort reporting during this period because we don't want to show effort certification based on the trials that are not going on or are going on or other research projects. So we're going to finalize some language on that that the compliance office can help us craft.
Thank you.
And I'd like to make a comment on something that I don't know how widespread this concern is, but when the city of Birmingham went to a shelter in place, for lack of a better expression, earlier this week, there was concern that, well, how can I get to work? I might not be able to get in, drive in. I might be stopped by law enforcement to be checked. Let me say that is not happening. Birmingham PD are not checking people. They're not stopping people. They have a lot of other things they need to do. And so that is not a concern. All I can say is one of the exceptions were state employees who were doing essential research. If you're a UAB employee, you're a state employee. If you're coming into work, it's because you've been deemed essential by your PI or your dean or your chair. So you'll be okay. Just have your UAB ID with you, which you do anyway. So that shouldn't be a concern, and I just want to assure people that that's not what's going on right now.
Thanks, Chris. Any other closing comments from any of the panelists? Anything else in the training front, school of public health, that we should emphasize? Well, I mean, this has really been a remarkable exchange. I want to thank everybody who participated, both on our panel, our presenters, the 300 people who logged in. Again, sincere regrets on not having a bigger Zoom capacity. We'll work on that as well. I think Zoom has become our new best friend. But this is really the beginning. This is the beginning of a series of discussions, and regrettably, we could be at this for a while, but as I said earlier, working together, doing this as colleagues, and recognizing the challenges that we're all collectively under is the way to get through this. So I would encourage all of you to take time to rest and get enough sleep. Make sure you wash your hands, don't touch your face, and we look forward to more discussions around research at UAB and continuing to grow our programs. So thank you all very much for a very engaging webinar.
Ken,
Yeah,
thank you
I just
very
want
much.
to thank you very much. I just want to echo all that. This is a very serious time, but I appreciate everyone taking time out of the busy schedule to tune in today. As a reminder, this presentation is archived. It'll be up on the screen. You can see the web address for where you can view it. And then also, if you would like a copy of the presentations, they will also be up on the CCTS website, the web address below. Again, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks all.